We've been talking about the elements of persuasion. We've already talked about the who, or the source of the message. And next we're going to talk about the what, or the content of the message. So in other words, the characteristics of the message. So this includes the quality of the evidence that's brought forth, and how explicit the information is, and a good persuasive talk provides a conclusion. High quality messages are a lot more persuasive in general, especially for people that have a lot of motivation to hear the message, so they might know something about the topic already, and they have the cognitive ability to actually process things at a deep, complex level. More attitude change will result if the speaker gives the conclusions to the persuasive talk that they hope to pass on. And more attitude change will result if the language is expressed in a really clear manner. So stay away from using scientific language unless you know that your audience is a group of scientists that are familiar with that language, or jargon that's particular to the field, unless you're sure that your audience actually understands the words. Otherwise, it's not likely to persuade. Vivid messages are usually more persuasive than matter-of-fact ones. An example is the identifiable victim effect, whereby messages with a single identifiable victim are more compelling than those without such vivid imagery. So if we see one individual as an example of a particular victim, whether it's a victim to illness or to political strife, we're more likely to identify with that one person than if it's reported a vast number of victims. Messages that instill fear in the audience can also be effective, but be careful, because if you use too much fear, if you go overboard, people will discount your message. They'll compare that to the knowledge that they have, and if they think it's overblown, it's likely to have a boomerang effect, and they're likely not to listen to you at all, and maybe even be persuaded in the opposite direction. But if you present a good amount of fear and not going overboard, and then combine that with instructions or education or resources about how to avoid negative outcomes, that's a very effective persuasive technique. Here's an example of how fear can be used most effectively. In this study, they had 3 different groups. All of the participants were smokers, and they were asked to keep track of how many cigarettes they smoked each day after they were in these experimental conditions. So one group was in a condition where they were just given instructions on how to stop smoking, and that represents this green bar. And this is how many cigarettes smoked each day, that together the group, the average that they identified. And then another separate group was exposed to a fear condition where they were required to watch a really graphic film that showed the really bad effects of lung cancer. And after they were in that condition, you can see that they, inducing those fear, vivid kind of images related to fear and smoking, that reduced consumption consistently compared to this other group. And then the third group of participants were exposed to both conditions. So they were given instructions on how to quit smoking, and they watched the graphic film. And it was under those conditions that afterwards participants reported smoking much less cigarettes. Another important thing to consider in your message is the culture of your audience. So it's important to tailor your message to fit into the norms and the attitudes of the cultural group that you're trying to persuade. And that leads us then to our next element of persuasiveness, and that's audience characteristics, or the whom. So the message is designed for the audience. What are the characteristics of the audience? The people who are receiving the message, including their need for cognition, their mood, their age, the size of the audience, and the diversity. They are all factors to consider in scripting your persuasive message. Let's look first at the need for cognition. What is it? This relates to number 24. And so number 24 of your study guide asks you specifically about need for cognition. And this is one's drive to think deeply about judgments. And people have varying degrees to this. People that are critical thinkers, people that are good at solving puzzles and enjoy it, people that can consider multiple perspectives on multiple causes, are people that have a stronger need for cognition. And they're more persuaded by that central root message than by the peripheral route message, remember. Now, number 23 on your study guide asks about some other audience characteristics: mood, age, audience size. So let's look at mood first. Messages are going to be more persuasive when they match the mood of the audience, whoever is receiving the message. And studies have been done to show that messages that are more optimistic in nature work best on people who are happy, for instance. The age of your audience is something that you want to consider. So younger people are more persuadable than older people. Older people might say they're set in their ways, but they have more experience and have stronger, longer held attitudes. So they're less likely to change. Children are most vulnerable to persuasion attempts. And so that it stands to reason that that's why some of the messages that are designed to help people improve their health are directed towards children. The size and diversity of the audience is another thing to consider. And this is the idea of tailoring your message to the specific audience that you are talking to. And when you do this, you have to have a good sense that those members are alike, because if they're different, you're going to lose your persuasiveness. If your audience size is smaller, then it's likely to be less diverse, so you can get more specific to tailor your message to them and to what their attitudes and beliefs might be. The larger the group, the more diverse it is, so you're going to have to tailor your message to be more inclusive of different types of attitudes and different ways to convince. So this frame relates to Brennell and Petty's study from 2003 about head nodding and persuasion. And it's about embodiment and confidence. So embodiment is about how our bodies can actually express and persuade someone in one way or another, or how we can actually persuade ourselves through our own embodiment. So the self-validation hypothesis has been identified through research to show that the bodily movements that we make can influence attitudes that people hold. So we assume then that attitudes are partly embodied. The body movements that you make as a speaker can signal how confident you are about your message. And it's that confidence that determines whether or not persuasion is going to occur. We're going to look next at the media and persuasion. So how effective is the media, the news, advertising in convincing us, persuading us? The third person effect is an interesting phenomenon, and this has been done through research where they surveyed people about how likely they thought they would be persuaded by a message, and also to rate how likely they would think other people would be persuaded by a message. And according to this research, people are much more likely to think that other people are likely to be persuaded by media campaigns than they themselves would be. How effective is the media in persuading us? Some of the from consumer advertising that research has looked into has shown that there's really not a lot of evidence to support the amount of money that's spent on advertising. It doesn't seem to have a direct effect on sales, but what it does seem to do is to help maintain product loyalty and awareness of the product and favorable attitudes that are associated with it. What about political advertising? This year we've seen a lot of political advertising and will continue to for some time now. The money spent on political campaigns, my goodness, it's amazing. Studies have shown that they don't have huge effects, in fact, minimal effects on the final number of votes received, because there are a lot of other reasons why people cast their vote the way that they do besides advertising and the money spent on it. The number of votes is much better predicted by things like how people voted in the past and how successful the candidates are that are running. And negative political ads especially have been found to actually decrease voter turnout. What about public service announcements, PSAs? So these are campaigns that are usually in the best interests of the population. They might be related to health or social practices like discouraging people from littering and that type of thing. How effective are they? Sometimes not very. So you're probably familiar with the DARE program, D-A-R-E, which ran for a number of years. I know my kids, when my kids went to school, it was a really important program going on, and we went to lots of DARE events. The stats on that have shown that children that participated in it as an anti-drug campaign were just as likely to use drugs 10 years later as children who didn't participate in the campaign. So it was shown to have little effect, and that's why it was ultimately discontinued. There are some exceptions though. So there are some effective PSA announcements. For example, your book talks about the Texas anti-littering campaign and how they used slogans like "Don't mess with Texas" in order to kind of draw people in that had that tough guy kind of sense of Texas pride. And it showed tough guys actually doing things like throwing their trash in trash cans instead of throwing it out the window. It was very effective. And also there's been STD education efforts that have taught kids how to resist unprotected sex that have been very effective.